My name is Emma Collins. I'm 28 years old, and until last year, I thought I had it all figured out. I'd spent nearly a decade working my way up at Marlowe's, a sleek, upscale restaurant in downtown Portland. Marlowe's wasn't just where I worked, it felt like my second home. I started as a hostess right out of college, eager to prove myself in a place that attracted the city's most demanding diners. Over time, I learned the ins and outs of service, the rhythm of the kitchen, the way to anticipate a guest's needs before they even spoke. By 26, I was the youngest floor manager in the restaurant's history. I was proud of that. Every morning, I unlocked the front door before sunrise. I'd walk the dining room, checking the alignment of the silverware, the folded napkins, the sparkle of the wine glasses. It mattered to me that everything was perfect. This place represented years of sweat, countless late nights, and the little victories I'd collected like charms on a bracelet. But it also held my bigger dream. One day, I told myself, I'd open my own restaurant, a place built on warmth, real hospitality, and simple, honest food. For a while, I believed I was getting closer to that goal. Then came Connor Harper. He arrived on a Monday morning in late September, introduced to us as the new regional director. He looked younger than I expected. Tall, perfectly pressed suit, hair slicked back with a little too much gel, the kind of smile that felt more like a challenge than a welcome. In our first meeting, he told us he was there to bring Marlowe's into a new era. He said standards were slipping and everyone needed to be prepared for change. I remember glancing at my assistant manager, Jeff. He looked just as uneasy as I felt. At first, it was small things. Connor questioning why we offered complimentary bread, why we used linen tablecloths, why we closed on Mondays. He started popping in at random hours, taking notes as if he were cataloging every mistake. By October, he was rewriting the schedules, rearranging responsibilities, and holding private meetings with the kitchen staff. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone near the service hallway. He was talking about me. "She's competent enough," he said flatly, "but she's too attached to the old way of doing things. It's time to get some fresh blood in here." That was the first time I felt the icy dread in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I worked. Still, I tried to stay positive. Maybe he'd see my results and realize I was an asset. Maybe this was just another test to prove I was resilient. But the tests kept coming. He started criticizing my inventory orders, questioning why we sourced produce from a local farm instead of a cheaper distributor. When a dishwasher broke down one weekend, he blamed me for failing to anticipate maintenance issues. Every week, he found something else to pick apart. Then, just after Thanksgiving, he scheduled a meeting. His assistant sent me a terse email. Subject: performance review. Time: 9 a.m. Location: Office 3. No context, no explanation. I didn't sleep much the night before. I kept replaying every moment I could have done better. Every receipt, every complaint, every minor oversight that he might twist into cause for dismissal. At 8:50, I sat outside Office 3, my heart pounding so hard I thought he'd hear it through the wall. The door opened. Connor stood there with a folder in his hand. His niece, Abby, a 23-year-old recent hospitality grad he'd been introducing around, sat beside him, her eyes fixed on her phone. He didn't ask me to sit. "Emma," he began, his tone almost bored, "we appreciate everything you've done, but it's clear your management style isn't aligned with the direction we're taking Marlowe's. Effective immediately, we're terminating your employment." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Connor continued, unbothered. "You'll be paid through the end of the week. HR will forward your paperwork." Beside him, Abby finally looked up. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I already knew. She was taking my place. The shock was so complete that I felt detached, like I was watching the scene happen to someone else. "You can gather your personal items now," he added, "and I'll need your keys before you leave." I turned and walked out. My legs felt unsteady, and the hallway seemed twice as long as I remembered. I passed the kitchen, where my staff was prepping for lunch service. A few of them looked up, confusion and pity etched on their faces. I didn't stop to explain. I couldn't. I left my keys on the hostess stand, the same place I'd picked them up every morning for 6 years, and then I stepped out into the cold, December rain. It was over. Just like that. I stood in the parking lot, shivering in my thin cardigan, wondering how everything I'd built could be stripped away in a single sterile meeting. In that moment, I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel capable or determined. I just felt lost. But sometimes, losing everything is what finally forces you to rebuild. I don't remember driving home. The whole trip was a blur. Portland's gray sky weeping rain onto the windshield as I sat behind the wheel, my hands trembling. When I finally pulled into the cracked driveway of my apartment building, I just sat there, staring at nothing. I'd always imagined that if something like this ever happened, I'd react with righteous anger. I'd storm out with my head held high, defiant, certain I'd find something better. But the truth was, I felt hollow. I climbed the stairs to my third-floor walk-up, unlocked the door, and stepped into the quiet. My little apartment had always been my refuge after long shifts. Soft lamplight, the faint smell of coffee, and clean laundry. But that day, it felt oppressive. The silence pressed on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I sank onto the couch and finally let the tears come. Hours passed that way. My phone buzzed over and over, text messages, missed calls, voicemails piling up. I couldn't bring myself to look at them. I didn't want to answer the questions or feel the pity in my coworkers' voices. As night fell, I forced myself to stand up and go to the kitchen. I made tea I didn't drink, trying to do anything that resembled normal. But the reality kept flooding back in waves. No job, no health insurance, no plan. And worst of all, no sense of purpose. I'd poured everything into Marlowe's. It wasn't just a paycheck. It was the place I proved to myself that I was capable, that I mattered. Now, it felt like none of it had meant anything. Around 9, I finally picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages. Jeff. I'm so sorry, this is complete garbage. Call me when you can. Maya, our lead server. Emma. Everyone is furious. We love you. Let me know if you need anything. My mom. Honey, call me. I don't care what time it is. I set the phone down and leaned against the counter, closing my eyes. I didn't want to call my mom yet. I wasn't ready to explain how I'd let someone take everything I'd worked for. When I woke up the next morning, I still felt raw. But there was something else under the sadness. A tiny flicker of something I hadn't expected. Relief. For months, I'd been holding my breath around Connor, never knowing what new criticism he'd throw at me. I'd been dreading every email, every conversation. Now that it was over, at least I didn't have to wonder when the axe would fall. I got dressed, pulled my hair into a ponytail, and decided to go for a walk. The rain had stopped, leaving everything slick and shining. I wandered through my old neighborhood, past coffee shops and storefronts. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of a place I hadn't visited in years, my grandmother's diner. It was called Lila's Table, a little brick building with green shutters and a hand-painted sign that had faded in the sun. My grandmother had opened it in the 70s, serving biscuits and coffee to dock workers and families. When she passed away, the diner closed, and no one in the family had the means to revive it. But even after all this time, the space still looked almost exactly as I remembered. I walked up to the dusty window and cupped my hands against the glass. Inside, sunlight streamed across the old booths, the linoleum counters, the black and white checkered floor. For a moment, I imagined what it would look like alive again, filled with people, music playing softly, the smell of fresh bread and roasted vegetables drifting into the street. I pressed my palm to the window, feeling something spark inside me that I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Back at my apartment, I pulled out a shoebox from the closet. It held clippings and notes I'd saved for years, menu ideas, sketches of floor plans, lists of local farms and vendors I dreamed of working with. I had no idea how I'd make any of it real. I barely had enough in my savings to cover rent for the next few months. But as I spread the papers across my coffee table, a thought took root in my mind. What if this wasn't the end? What if this was the chance I'd been too scared to take? That afternoon, Jeff came over with takeout and a six-pack. He listened quietly while I told him everything: the meeting, the look on Abby's face, the way it felt to have my identity stripped away in an instant. When I finished, he set down his drink and met my gaze. "You know," he said slowly, "Connor may have done you a favor." I frowned. "How do you figure that?" "You were never going to leave Marlowe's on your own. Even when it stopped feeling good, you were too loyal to walk away. But you've been talking about starting your own place since the day I met you. Maybe this is your sign." I didn't say anything, because part of me knew he was right. The next morning, I called my mom. Her voice cracked when she heard mine, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I let her comfort me. "I'm proud of you, baby," she said. "You've always been stronger than you think." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the pile of notes on the table. I didn't know exactly how yet, but in that moment, I decided I wouldn't let Connor's decision define me. I was going to find a way to bring Lila's table back to life, even if it meant starting from scratch. The next few weeks were some of the most uncertain of my life. I woke up every morning with that gnawing feeling in my stomach, equal parts fear and excitement. I spent hours researching how to reopen a shuttered business. I learned about health codes, zoning permits, small business loans, and all the regulations that seemed deliberately designed to make you quit before you ever began. At night, I sat at my coffee table, surrounded by piles of paperwork and my grandmother's old recipe cards, the tiny script in her handwriting: buttermilk biscuits, chicken pot pie, peach preserves, felt like a lifeline tethering me to something good, something worth fighting for. One morning, I made an appointment with a business advisor at the Small Business Development Center downtown. I walked in clutching a folder stuffed with my plans, my hands so clammy I could barely hold on to it. Her name was Janice, a woman in her 60s with a kind smile and a no-nonsense energy. She listened patiently as I spilled everything: the sudden firing, the abandoned diner, my dream of turning it into a modern farm-to-table bistro. When I finished, she tapped her pen against her notepad thoughtfully. "It's ambitious," she said, "but you've got something most people don't: a clear vision. That matters more than you realize." She helped me lay out a step-by-step plan: estimate startup costs, secure funding, draft a business plan, inspect the property, apply for all necessary permits. It was overwhelming, but it was also the first time in weeks I felt like I had a roadmap. I left her office with a checklist and a flicker of cautious optimism. Over the next few days, I called the property manager to arrange a walkthrough. The building had sat empty for nearly a decade. The front door stuck in the frame, the paint was peeling, and the kitchen equipment was ancient. Still, as I stood in the middle of the dining room, I could picture it: warm pendant lights, reclaimed wood tables, fresh flowers in little glass jars. A place that felt inviting and real, the opposite of the sterile perfection Connor always demanded. When the property manager asked if I was serious about taking it on, I surprised myself by saying yes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake wondering if I'd lost my mind. What if I failed? What if I poured everything into this and it didn't work? But the next morning, I got up, brewed coffee, and started filling out the paperwork. I knew I'd have to get creative about funding. My savings weren't enough. I applied for microloans and community grants. I even started a crowdfunding campaign, sharing the story of my grandmother's legacy and my hope to rebuild it. To my astonishment, people began donating. Old neighbors, former customers of Lila's table, friends of my mom, even a few strangers who just liked the idea of a woman fighting for a second chance. Their messages humbled me. My parents used to take me there every Sunday after church. Your story reminds me of my own daughter. I believe in you. One evening, Jeff and Maya came over with pizza to help me brainstorm. We sat on my living room floor, sketching out menu ideas and potential suppliers. We can call it Lila's Table again, Maya said, smiling. It already has a story. I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone else to believe in this with me. But for every encouraging moment, there were setbacks. The inspection revealed black mold in part of the kitchen wall. The plumbing was outdated. The ovens were beyond repair. I spent hours calling contractors, trying to find someone who could give me a fair estimate without draining my entire budget. Some days, the obstacles piled so high I could barely see over them. One afternoon, I sat in my car outside the diner, staring at the cracked sign and fighting the urge to cry. I pulled out my grandmother's old recipe box and flipped it open. Inside was a photo I'd forgotten. Me at 8 years old, standing on a stool beside her, my hands covered in flour. She had one arm around me and the brightest smile on her face. I could almost hear her voice. Honey, there's no such thing as perfect. You just do the best you can with what you have. I pressed the photo to my chest, feeling something shift inside me. It didn't matter how messy this process was. I was finally building something of my own. That night, I made a list of every task I needed to tackle the next day. No matter how daunting it felt, I promised myself I'd keep going. I taped that list to my refrigerator. It was the first thing I saw the next morning, and every morning after that. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the fear started giving way to determination. If there's one thing I learned, it's that starting over doesn't look the way you think it will. It isn't a straight line from loss to triumph. It's more like stumbling through the dark with a flickering flashlight. Sometimes you can see your path. Sometimes you can't. But you keep moving forward anyway. By January, I'd signed the lease for Lila's Table. The day I held the keys in my hand, I stood in the doorway for a long time, feeling the gravity of it. This little building had been closed for nearly 10 years, but it still smelled faintly of flour and old coffee. I thought about all the mornings my grandmother opened the doors before dawn, never imagining her granddaughter would be doing the same someday. I called Jeff and Maya to help me start the cleanup. We spent hours hauling out broken chairs, peeling wallpaper, and scrubbing years of grime from the counters. My arms ached, and my clothes were streaked with dust, but I didn't care. Every piece of debris we cleared made the dream feel a little more real. I used what little savings I had left to hire contractors to replace the plumbing and repair the kitchen walls. While they worked, I focused on everything I could do myself. Sanding and sealing the floors, painting the walls, polishing the old brass fixtures until they gleamed. Some nights I was so tired I fell asleep on the floor in the back room. But each morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Word started to spread that Lila's Table was coming back. Neighbors stopped by to peek inside, sharing memories of breakfasts eaten here decades ago. One woman brought me a faded menu she'd kept in a scrapbook. Another gave me a framed photo of my grandmother behind the counter. Those gestures kept me going on the days when it all felt impossible. I also began documenting the renovation on social media. I posted photos of the progress: fresh paint on the walls, new pendant lights over the bar, the first deliveries of reclaimed wood tables. I shared stories about my grandmother, about what the diner meant to our family and our community. To my surprise, people responded. They commented, messaged, and even donated to my crowdfunding page. Each note felt like another vote of confidence, another reason to keep pushing. But the setbacks kept coming. One rainy Wednesday, the health inspector arrived for the pre-opening check. I'd stayed up all night preparing, triple-checking labels, cleaning every surface until it gleamed. She walked through the kitchen with her clipboard, her expression unreadable. I followed her, my heart in my throat. When she finished, she looked up and sighed. "I'm sorry, Ms. Collins. You've got a pest issue in the back storage area. I can't approve this until it's resolved." It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I'd already delayed the opening twice, and every postponement drained more of my dwindling funds. After she left, I locked the door, sat down on the cold tile, and let the frustration pour out. How many more hurdles could there possibly be? I thought about Connor, about the smug look on his face when he told me I wasn't aligned with the direction of Marlowe's, about how easy it would have been to crawl back to someone like him and ask for any job at all, just to feel secure again. But when I closed my eyes, I saw the version of myself who had stood in this very kitchen as a child, dreaming of someday being in charge. I realized I owed it to her not to quit. I wiped my face, picked up my phone, and called a pest control service. They promised to be there the next morning. That night, I stayed late, scrubbing every shelf and sealing every crack I could find. I left the diner at 3 a.m., exhausted but resolute. Within 3 days, the issue was cleared. The inspector came back, and this time, she signed off on everything. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding the official approval notice in my hands. After all the setbacks, all the fear and doubt, I was finally allowed to open. Jeff and Maya came over that night with champagne. We sat cross-legged on the freshly cleaned floor, toasting to the fact that this crazy dream was about to become reality. "This place is going to be special," Maya said, her eyes shining. "People will feel it the minute they walk in." I hoped she was right, because in just 1 week, Lila's table would open its doors for the first time in a decade. And whether it succeeded or failed, I would know that I hadn't let fear decide my future. The week before opening felt like the longest 7 days of my life. Every morning, I woke up before dawn, heart hammering, mind racing with the endless list of details that still needed attention. There were menus to finalize, produce orders to confirm, table arrangements to tweak, staff schedules to sort. Even the smallest task felt monumental. The night before opening, I stayed at the diner until nearly midnight, making sure every chair was aligned, every glass spotless, every receipt printer loaded. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I stood behind the counter and let the quiet sink in. In that moment, the fear came rushing back. What if no one showed up? What if the critics hated it? What if I had risked everything for nothing? I thought about how easy it would have been to stay where I was, to keep my head down and accept whatever Connor decided for me. But then I imagined the look on my grandmother's face if she could see this place now, shining again, ready to welcome the community she'd loved. That image steadied me. When I finally went home, the sky was beginning to lighten. I lay in bed for an hour, eyes wide open, until my alarm buzzed and it was time to return. At 5 a.m., I unlocked the door and stepped into the dining room. The air was crisp, smelling of fresh paint and possibility. By 6, my small team had arrived. Jeff, Maya, and 3 others who'd worked with me at Marlowe's and left when they heard about my project. We stood in a loose circle in the kitchen, all of us bleary-eyed but smiling. "Whatever happens today," I told them, "I want you to know I'm grateful. None of this would exist without you." Maya reached over and squeezed my hand. "Let's show them what we can do." The first hour was a blur. Coffee brewing, pastries warming, orders starting to trickle in. I was so focused on the line at the register, I didn't notice the woman standing by the door until she cleared her throat. I turned and felt my chest tighten. It was Mrs. Henson, my grandmother's oldest friend. She was holding a bouquet of yellow tulips. "Thought Lila might like to be here in spirit," she said, pressing the flowers into my hands. I swallowed hard, fighting tears. "Thank you." By 8 a.m., every table was full. Families, couples, elderly neighbors. Some I recognized from the old days, others brand new. People took photos of their plates, posted them online, and tagged us. I could feel the energy building, word spreading faster than I could have hoped. At 11:30, the door opened, and a hush fell over the staff. A man in a blue blazer walked in, carrying a small leather-bound notebook. He glanced around, taking in every detail, then settled into a corner booth. Maya leaned in close. "Food critic." I felt my stomach drop. I knew this would happen eventually, but I hadn't expected it on day one. I took a deep breath and decided that if he was going to write about us, he'd get the best we had to offer. I personally took his order: roasted vegetable hash with poached eggs and a cup of our house blend coffee, and checked every plate before it left the kitchen. When I set the food down in front of him, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he said simply, then flipped open his notebook and started writing. I walked back to the counter, adrenaline thrumming in my veins. Around 1:05 p.m., I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. I stepped outside, leaning against the brick wall and feeling the winter sun on my face. Jeff came out to join me, wiping his hands on his apron. "Full house," he said, grinning. I smiled back, too tired to speak. Inside, the noise of conversation and clinking dishes carried through the windows. I thought about all the nights I'd sat in this same spot as a kid, swinging my legs and watching my grandmother greet every customer like an old friend. And now, here I was, standing in her place. When the lunch rush finally slowed, the critic paid his bill and stood to leave. As he passed the counter, he paused. "It's rare," he said, "to find a place that feels like it has a soul." Then he nodded once and walked out. I watched the door close behind him, my heart hammering. Whatever he wrote, I knew I'd done something I could be proud of. That night, when we closed up, I stood alone in the dining room, the quiet settling around me like a blanket. For the first time since that awful morning in Connor's office, I felt something close to peace. The weeks after opening blurred together in a way I'll never forget. Every morning, I unlocked the front door before sunrise, just like my grandmother did. The old routines returned: checking the lights, straightening chairs, breathing in the smell of freshly brewed coffee. But this time, everything felt different, because it was mine. Lila's table quickly became a little beacon on our block. Word spread fast, first through the neighborhood, then across the city. Articles appeared online with headlines like, "A beloved Portland diner returns with heart and heritage." People came because they were curious, but they stayed because they felt at home. Sometimes, in the middle of a busy breakfast rush, I'd pause for a second and look around the dining room. I'd see a young couple leaning across the table holding hands, an older man reading the paper with crumbs on his sweater, a mother showing her daughter how to stir honey into tea. It was everything I had dreamed of when this place was still just an idea scrawled on the back of a receipt. But the real surprise came 2 months after opening. I was in the office tallying invoices when Jeff knocked lightly and slipped me an envelope. "You might want to see this," he said, raising an eyebrow. It was a letter from the regional office of Marlowe's. For a moment, I considered throwing it away without reading it, but curiosity won out. Inside was a short, carefully worded note. "Emma, we hope you're doing well. We've been following the success of Lila's Table and would love to discuss the possibility of having you return to Marlowe's in a leadership role. Your expertise has always been an asset. Please contact us if you'd like to talk. Best, Connor Harper. I read it twice, trying to understand how it made me feel. There was a time when I would have done anything to get back what I lost at Marlowe's. But standing there, holding that letter, I realized something had shifted. I no longer needed their validation. I had built something better, something that belonged to me and no one else. I tucked the letter in a drawer and never replied. That evening, after closing, I sat alone at the counter, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands. The dining room was quiet, the tables gleaming in the glow of the pendant lights I'd chosen myself. My phone buzzed with a notification. A review had just gone live. I opened the link, bracing for criticism, but the headline made my throat tighten. Lila's table reminds us what restaurants should be, places where people feel seen. I set the phone down and let out a long, shaky breath. All the nights spent scrubbing floors, the setbacks and doubts, the fear of failing, it was all worth it. Because in the end, I'd done exactly what I set out to do. I built a place that had a soul, and I learned that sometimes being pushed out of where you think you belong is the only way to discover where you're meant to be. These days, I still wake up early. I still fuss over the little details, straightening menus, polishing glassware, checking in on every table. But I do it with a lighter heart. When I lock up at night, I walk out onto the sidewalk and look back at the hand-painted sign over the door. Leela's table. It feels like a promise to myself, and to everyone who comes through those doors. No matter where you've been or what you've lost, you can always begin again. I hope my story reminds you that it's never too late to reclaim your purpose and create something beautiful. Because if I can do it, if I can lose everything and build it back better, you can too.